Good evening. Thank you for joining tonight's Conversations for Change about the U.S. and the Holocaust. My name is Howard Libet. I'm the Executive Director of the Baltimore Jewish Council. I'm going to be moderating tonight's conversation, and I want to thank Maryland Public Television for both putting together tonight's conversation and for inviting the four of us to join. We're lucky we have three amazing individuals joining us tonight who are working directly in the field of fighting anti-Semitism and hate, educating about the Holocaust, commemorating and building new bridges across different communities. Let me quickly introduce our three panelists, and then we'll jump right into the conversation. We're joined by Emily Goodman, who's a member of my team. She's the Director of Holocaust and Countering Anti-Semitism Programming for the Baltimore Jewish Council. We're joined by Marissa Schultz, also here in Maryland, the Education Program Manager at the Jewish Museum of Maryland. And at a national level, we're joined by Stacey Aviva Flint. She's the Director of Jedi Education and Community Engagement with the Jewish Federations of North America. For those who are troubled by acronyms like me, Jedi stands for the Jewish Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, a very important area that the Jewish Federations has started working in. For our first question, I think it might make sense for us to start more locally, and then we'll expand our lens to a national scope. So I'll turn to Emily and then Marissa and then Stacey. And I want to talk about in what ways Americans today confront hatred and promote human dignity and work to prevent genocide. And I encourage you, as you think about this and answer this question, talk about, related to the work you're doing here in Maryland or across the nation, the tangible examples of the kinds of things you're seeing, the kinds of things you're working on, I think will really help educate people as we all reflect on that powerful excerpt of this upcoming documentary.
Sure. Thank you, Howard. And thank you again to Maryland Public Television for inviting the BJC to be a part of this important program tonight. So when I think about what we as Americans can do today to confront hatred, I think something that you're going to hear tonight a lot of is education, right? And what is some of that work that we as Americans can do to educate ourselves about hatred that we may not experience, but that others in our community might? And so something that the Baltimore Jewish Council does a lot of is work educating the community, not just about our own Jewish community, but about other communities in our region. So doing work, interfaith work, doing intrafaith work, learning about the other denominations of Judaism that maybe one does not fall in, but wanting to learn more about others who share that same culture. But also, working with students is, I think, always a route of where you can start to teach how to confront that hatred and to learn about those challenging histories, something that I do at the Baltimore Jewish Council every year with a Catholic school in the region, the John Carroll School. We put on a full day workshop for students across the state to come and learn about not just the Holocaust, but the Holocaust and other genocides. We can't focus on just one, but focusing about the others. And the Holocaust, as recent as we know it to be, there have been various genocides since then. And it's important that we're teaching our young people about how that happens and how we can be upstanders and, make sure that does not continue, and that our students are being equipped with the knowledge for other cultures that are not how they identify, and the respect and how to respect those cultures.
Thanks, Emily. Marissa?
Yeah, I think education will probably be a theme here. For me, a lot of my work is working with teachers, engaging with teachers to help them teach about the Holocaust and other traumatic histories in their classrooms in ways that are nuanced and sensitive to the trauma inherent in these histories. I think in education, we often say difficult history or challenging history. And what's happening when we do that is we're dancing around the fact that there's pain and suffering and trauma at the heart of them. And so I like to bring that straight out and name that. One of the a big part of my work, and I actually do this in partnership with Emily and with the Baltimore Jewish Council, is our Summer and Winter Teachers Institutes. These are multi-day workshops on the best practices of Holocaust education, working with teachers to help them know how to approach this in their classrooms, to support their students' learning and growth, and to hopefully give students the opportunity to reflect on history, to understand how Holocaust history can be connected to other moments in history, other genocides, atrocities, human rights violations, and to help them reflect on what is happening in their world now, the reverberations of these histories. It's a really important part of my work, and I think is a cornerstone to helping people confront hatred in our world today.
Thanks, Marissa. And Stacy, you're working with communities all over the United States. Tell us a little more about, from a broader lens, what you see.
Thank you. So yes, the Jewish Federations of North America really are the backbone of the American Jewish community, representing over 300 communities in North America and Canada, raising funds and advocating for communal security and social services that benefit the Jewish community and also other vulnerable populations. In Jeddah, since our inception, we have established ourselves as a leader and educator of our Jewish communal professionals and lay leaders in a system-wide effort to advance the transformation of the American consciousness, centering social and racial justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion with a Jewish lens. We've worked with 21 communities across the Federation system, and now Baltimore will be one of those communities, to go into a year-long intensive opportunity to learn from a Jewish lens what it means for our communities to really be in conversation with one another. The Jewish Federations has been a leader in promoting person-centered trauma-informed care. And I loved when you talked about trauma, that we have to understand that we're really talking about trauma, and a sense of shared trauma is so important. Nationally, we have found that a recent study says that college students between the ages of 18 and 24 who have had some kind of curricula in high school on Holocaust education are shown to be more pluralistic in their attitudes. They're more open to different viewpoints and identities. They have higher critical thinking skills, and they're more likely to challenge biased information and even stand up for intolerant behavior and stereotyping, and to offer assistance. And when you get people together to look at their respective histories, historical trauma is important. It's in the Native American population. It's in our Jewish population. We know there's even post-traumatic slave syndrome in the African American community. And when we have mutual empathy for one another, we're finding that people, when they are able to look at their own history, their own identities, and the trauma that may be in their own community, it makes them more empathetic when they begin exploring others' stories. And we've really seen this in our training across the country. We've seen people sit across the table and hear one another's stories and go, I understand you better. And I even understand my story better. And we're very excited that more and more Jewish communities and federations are asking for this training. We look forward to working with more.
That's really important. It's interesting. I think on all three of your answers, at one point you may have used the phrase "standing up," and I think that whole concept of being an upstander, not a bystander, is something we're hearing about, and I think it speaks to the question of, what conditions can we create to motivate people to help each other, to stand up for each other better? Are there things we can be doing as a community, as a society, as in education, to help get there so that we all work together more? Marissa, would you like to tackle that one first?
Sure. I think this is a pretty challenging question because there's a lot of ways that it could be answered. I think the thread that I'll pull through that is connected with my work is actually the way in which we teach stories of rescue during the Holocaust. I think we're really tempted to teach those stories a lot. And one of the things that we're asked to do sort of in pedagogical frameworks is to help students consider the context and the broader context of what is going on in the lives and in the communities of people that engaged in rescue, as a way of helping students better understand the complexities, right? It could be easy to tell a story of rescue and make it seem like it was this easy choice or the obvious choice, or out of the goodness of their hearts, but helping students understand what was actually happening, the challenges of making that decision, the risks that came with it, can help them understand sort of the complexities and challenges within their own world. And I'll also say that in those same sort of pedagogical frameworks, we also don't want to just teach stories of rescue, because if students are only hearing one kind of narrative, they're going to walk away from that Holocaust course with sort of a very particular lens that is only telling one kind of story. And it's important that they hear stories of rescue, but also understand that that was the vast minority of experiences. And that is going to help them sort of understand how important it is to engage in standing up in their own communities today, these two pieces together.
Stacy, you want to jump in on this question? And again, feel free to go in a totally different direction from Marissa. I think as she pointed out, it's a very broad question that you can take in any direction you want.
Yes. I really appreciate just the pedagogy that that's being mentioned, and the importance of providing multiple angles. I think it's really important also too for, and we've said it, cross-cultural education, so that communities are visiting one another's respective museums and memorials to create a shared understanding and empathy, to understand how various immigrant communities in America have been traumatized by words, power plays, and denials of rights. It's important that we understand our history and how some of this was systematized in our culture and in our laws. And when you go and visit one another's respective memorials, it creates deeper empathy. It creates a shared history, not just it's my history. It becomes it's our history and it's our story. And then the responsibilities for standing up or making sure it doesn't happen in the future is not on one community. It's on all of us, because we have come to realize that we are interconnected.
I'm going to, if I turn to Emily, I'm going to throw her a bit of a curveball to suggest for her answer to this question. Prior to her current position, she worked as program coordinator for the Elijah Cummings Youth Program in Israel. And what we're talking about speaks to the very heart of what Congressman Cummings created almost 25 years ago in terms of his youth program. And I wonder, Emily, if you could take a second to talk about it and talk about how his vision has helped to build those deeper relationships across the Jewish and Black communities of Baltimore.
Sure, of course. Being able to be a part of the Elijah Cummings Youth Program in Israel, or I'll refer to it as ECYP from now on, for the sake of time. The whole mission behind that organization is to take two communities that have a large predominant presence in the Baltimore community, and live, together in one particular part of Baltimore in the Park Heights area, but often don't intertwine, don't connect while living in the same neighborhood. And really the whole root of that idea was, how can we build a community together? How can we bridge these two different cultures, these two different groups within one community, and combine them as one? And so something that program does, and does so well, is takes students who don't have typical exposure to other students of different cultures, even if they might live a couple streets down the road, and teaching them about each other and teaching them about their cultures, sending predominantly African-American non-Jewish students to Israel for an immersive trip to see what life is like for Jewish and non-Jewish individuals, teens their age, living in another country, in a culture that they're not a part of, but want to learn about and see how similar that those, they can be, even if they share different religions or different countries. At the end of the day, they're teens and they have the same, teen challenges, right? But then bringing it back to Baltimore, once, you're building these relationships with others in your community that are not completely the same as you and you share, some of the same things, but you also have differences. If at the end of the day, when you can identify that person is a person who is like you in some way and that you do share these things, why would you not be motivated to get to know them, to help them, to stand up for them, and to want to enjoy their culture in a respectful way and share your culture with them? So again, it really comes down to, as Stacy mentioned before, having people share their stories and learning from their stories. And I won't talk for too much longer, but just for example, as we talk about the Holocaust work, something that the BJC offers is a Holocaust Survivor Speakers Bureau. And this is, I think, the most important resource that I can offer the community, because while we still have Holocaust survivors living amongst us locally, we have some who are willing to share their stories that are difficult for them to share and sometimes for the audience to hear. But being able to hear those first person experiences, that I think is the most motivating thing that you can do, especially in terms of motivating students to get involved and to learn more. To hear from someone who survived such horror and tragedy, it's inspiring, and I think students connect extremely well to the material when they can put a face to it rather than a number.
Thanks, Emily. As I think about the excerpt we saw tonight, and a theme of the whole documentary, as well as the powerful exhibit at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum down in Washington, is this idea of the U.S. role during the Holocaust, and whether, unfortunately, the lack of response we saw then, and I think it raises a great question about, how has that U.S. role changed? And I see both good and bad, and I'll let you guys dive into it more. But I'll just note, we do have an ambassador to combat anti-Semitism now, appointed in our State Department. That's a significant position that we certainly weren't thinking about back then. But we also, we struggle to admit refugees who are enough refugees who are under threat around the world, much like we did back then when Jews were trying to escape. So it's certainly not a glass all empty or a glass all full. I wonder if you all want to think about how the U.S. has changed and how anti-Semitism within the U.S. has changed, or in some ways hasn't changed. Feel free to tackle any or all parts of that. Stacy, if you want to tackle this first.
Thank you. I think that the American people really understand themselves as a community that's welcoming to others. We really have that as a value in our minds. But we've seen that with each wave of immigrants that come in, it's almost like immigrants will come in and then shut the door behind others who are also trying to come in. It's very easy for fear-mongering to become spread throughout our communities. As some of the filming shows, is that there were people who really understood the benefits that immigrants bring to our society. But there was a small, powerful group of people who were able to get out messages that to the contrary. And so we have to, that's why it's so important that we educate our electorate and help people to share those positive stories. great to the greater public of what immigrants have and still continue to do for our country. People need to realize that immigrants in the U.S. constitute 15% of the general U.S. workforce, and that they comprise 25% of U.S. entrepreneurs. And so really getting that message out of what the immigrants have and do contribute to our society is so important.
Yeah.
Emily or Marissa, you want to tackle this?
Yeah, I think Stacy answered that beautifully, and I don't have a ton to add, but I like the way that you framed it, Howard, a glass half empty, half full. In the last 80 plus years since the Holocaust, we have seen, changes for the better in terms of immigration policy and how the U.S. approaches not just anti-Semitism, but other forms of hatred. But at the same time, how recent was that appointment made that we had, have Deborah Lipstadt at the federal level combating anti-Semitism? Should that have been something that has been put in place far sooner? Probably, but at the same time, we are seeing alarming rates of anti-Semitism increasing and also alarming rates of other types of bigotry. And I think, not to get political, but I think a lot of it has to do with educating, as Stacy said, the electorate and setting precedents that are, against this type of hatred that has in some way or shape been allowed to penetrate kind of the U.S. culture.
Great. We're getting some terrific questions from the audience too, and we're going to try and get through as many of them as we can. I want to start with one here that I think was right up. It focuses particularly for Marissa here, which is looking at the question. Well, I know we've talked around the subject, but very specifically, why is Holocaust education and the U.S. response to it such an important topic for Americans today, particularly at the school age? I just, talk a little about some of the awful survey statistics we see and why we need to educate about it.
I think I want to address the American response piece first, because I think that's a sort of a new trend in Holocaust education. And I think a lot of that is spurred by the Americans in the Holocaust exhibition at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum that this documentary is drawing from and building upon. It's now part of the Maryland State Department of Education social studies frameworks. There's an objective in U.S. history that asks teachers to engage with the American response to the Holocaust. And I think what is so essential, and I want to pull on a thread that Stacy was talking about in the last question about, or maybe the question before, about this idea of narrative and the narratives that we tell about the United States and the narratives that we tell about this country and its history. And one of the things that this exhibition and this documentary do is it cracks that narrative wide open. And it asks us to actually wrestle with the very nuanced, complicated, uncomfortable sometimes history of the American response. The fact that newsreels and newspapers were reporting on what was happening, and yet there's not that much of there is some response, but maybe not as much as we would have hoped. And I think it's so essential that we bring that into our classrooms. One, so that students are sort of dismantling these myths around the United States and around this history. I think it's really important that we look at history with a nuanced eye, but also as a way of helping them understand in our current moment the choices that we have in front of us as individuals, as communities, and as a nation. And I think it's very easy in Holocaust education to just say that's something that happened all those years ago, really far away, and to simply think of it as something that happened in Europe and in Northern Africa, and to not really think about the larger global contexts that come with it. And I think it's really essential.
I think something you're saying too, Marissa, is it humanizes all of us and helps us to realize that it was humans and it was Americans, and it was peer pressure, and it can help build those critical thinking skills today of, if I see something similar, how can I make different choices and different decisions, even when all around, a student or a community, people are saying something different. And when you can see other people and how they made those choices, positive and negative choices, it really helps you to be that civil citizen that we're looking for today, who knows how to grapple with choices.
So Emily, can you take that to the level of when you're working with groups, whether it's students or college students, in terms of when they see incidents of hate? How do they, it's not just always standing up for the genocide happening somewhere around the world, but it's also standing up for groups that are here that are being attacked with various waves of hate, isn't it?
Absolutely. It goes back to that relationship building. I think as humans, nobody should be treated in one such way. But, if you are witnessing this, if you are a student and you're seeing this happen in your classrooms, in your schools, on your campuses, it's important. It goes back to that upstander conversation. Maybe you as a student don't feel equipped or capable of confronting somebody in that moment, but knowing that you can have resources, and knowing that if you are, for example, on a campus and you go to your school's diversity offices and you report that, knowing you can get help, get resources, and have the ability to bring together your fellow students or your peers and start to have those conversations. You don't have to be, doing something for someone or some atrocity that's happening overseas, when there's plenty that you can be doing in your own community. And, the BJC, we want to be a support to people in our community, on our local campuses. If you find that you are being confronted by any type of, anti-Semitism or hatred, how can you utilize your resources to ensure that everyone is being treated with fairness and the same respect as any other group of individuals on your campus?
I want to turn to a question from the audience here that seems both so simple and is so complicated, but it cuts to the heart of the Holocaust and so much of anti-Semitism through history. Why was it so easy to make Jews the scapegoat for a nation's problems? And I think we see that not just at the Holocaust, we see that over time. Who would anyone like to try and tackle the beginnings of that question, or start to tackle it?
Yeah.
I think I'll hop in here.
Take a first crack. It seems so simple, but it's so deep in terms of, but it gets really to the heart of hate.
It does. And I will say what I often say to students when I work with students. When they ask me a really complicated question with a complicated answer, I always start off by acknowledging the complexity of the question, and then let them know that we're going to start to scratch the surface together, that there's going to be more to this answer than what we can share in the time that we have, and that historians wrestle with this question all the time. I think from a historical perspective, specifically around the Holocaust, something that's really important to keep in mind is the very long history of anti-Semitism in Europe and anti-Judaism, I think, is a cornerstone of this. It's a little bit of a perfect storm. So we have the long history of anti-Semitism in Europe. We have, in the context of the Holocaust, right, somewhat relatively new eugenics and racialized science that's coming to play. We have a country that's economically, morally devastated at the end of a war, at the end of the First World War. And it creates this sort of, and a country that is a new republic and is deeply afraid of sort of communism, right? And it creates this perfect storm in which it was easy to target a group that was otherized and that had been otherized for a long time. And so that's sort of the scratch of the historical surface, if you will. There's a lot more. And as I would say to my students, it's a very complicated question with a complicated answer.
A great start. Yes. Emily, you want to jump in, or you want me to move to the next?
I can jump in there. I don't know that I'll speak as elegantly as Marissa did, but when I think about it from an American standpoint and how the American response to the Holocaust and this, the scapegoating on Jews, during the time of the Holocaust, as you've seen in this footage, we also know that there were people who shared these anti-Semitic beliefs, Nazism, in the United States. And there's a lot of history that is not often discussed and not often taught about how some of that was brought to America. You talk about Henry Ford and how he helped propagate some of these anti-Semitic stereotypes and myths and through his paper, and how millions of Americans found that to be credible. And there's a lot of, as Marissa said, complex information and history that we don't have time to get into. But I encourage people to take the time to look into that and into the American response and why there were so many groups in America who were against letting Jews come to the United States and escape the Nazism. So I just like to encourage people to look into that further on their own.
And if I could just jump in really quickly,
Sure.
I would also encourage people to look into the connectedness of the roots of racism and anti-Semitism, and how Nazi laws, the Nuremberg laws, and discrimination against the Jewish community really had its foundation and was bolstered by segregation and Jim Crow and the racism in America. And so whenever we talk about fighting anti-Semitism, I always say, and racism, and how can we join our collective resources and conversations together, because at the end of the day, we're talking about systems that share a common root, common language, and will borrow from one another to exclude the Jewish community and the African American community. And one of the things that's so critical is they don't want us to work together. They want us to see one another's fights as separate. And so we've got to continually find those connections so that we can actually be working together to fight a common evil.
That leads into a question here that really seems to speak to a lot of the work you do, Stacey, which this one audience member says, I find that people will theoretically agree on issues like cultural differences, but they don't get out of their bubbles. This is true of the Jewish community and many communities. So how do we encourage all groups to truly interact with others, to want to engage, to get beyond the niceties and actually engage on these types of things?
It's a great question, and I'll be like my colleague Marissa here and say that it's hard. We've been trying to do this for a very long time, and so it's not going to turn around in a day. But what we can do is we can put our resources to joint educational efforts, joint missions together. And then when there are any policies that encourage people living together in community, housing, it was all about keeping people separate. And even as things are being challenged in communities with, I won't go into some of those things, they're just too political, but definitely putting our resources into joint efforts. I know with JEDI, there is a mission in Ethiopia right now where Jewish leaders are there talking to the Ethiopian community. And we are going to be planning a mission next year to take Jews of color and to take African American leaders and Jewish leaders to Israel. And we're not just going to be looking at everything like, just all the typical touristy things. We're going to be talking to Ethiopians. We're going to be talking to people in communities about the actual challenges that are going on, and going to places and having conversations that might not otherwise be had, so that we can have a balanced conversation. And that takes resources. And so we're looking to put staff resources and dollar resources into bringing people together and actually taking, like you said, taking them to the places and having those difficult conversations. So it takes money and resources to get people together, but it's worth it.
I think I think we probably have time for one more question. I'm gonna turn to the question that a lot of us wrestle with, which is the kind of Holocaust denial, and how do we help? I think people encounter criticism, those who deny the Holocaust, or say it wasn't, the numbers are exaggerated, or say, well, Israel should not exist, and don't acknowledge the history of the Holocaust, the need for there to be a place for Jews to be safe. How should people respond to that? How should they how should we educate our community, our next generation, those who maybe haven't been fortunate enough to hear directly from survivors, to respond to that, to counter that?
That's a very difficult question.
I haven't asked an easy one yet tonight, have I?
No, I guess not.
Thank you to the audience for such tough questions.
But I'll take a go at it first. I think that when it comes to Holocaust denial and distortion, it once again just comes back to education. We have seen in studies over the past few years that so few individuals, according to certain studies, know about the Holocaust, or know what happened, or know who the victims were. Respondents saying that less than 2 million Jews were killed. And it's alarming and it's scary. And we also understand that teachers are pressed for time a lot. And it's hard to teach this many years of one genocide in maybe a day, if teachers are lucky, right? But it's just, it is a need for more Holocaust education, stronger Holocaust education. And for agencies like the Jewish Museum of Maryland and other groups to put out resources for teachers to be able to get the materials, so they don't have to do that work. That work is there for them. But as long as we are not if we don't educate our students, and there's an age that you really start, but at some point students need to be made aware of this. We can't teach all of history from rose-colored glasses. It is a difficult history, as Marissa worded before with that wording, but to ensure that if we're teaching the proper facts and the research has been done for us, students will begin to learn from a younger age, and I think that's important. I feel like I could go on a lot, and I'm rambling at this point, so I will hand the mic over.
Marissa or Stacy, you want to speak to Holocaust denial? And
I really appreciate what's been said by my colleagues, and that we just can't reiterate enough how it's important to educate, and to educate at an early age, so we can advocate for the inclusion of age-appropriate material for Holocaust curriculum. It is amazing that some of this material is being removed, and it's totally age-appropriate. Maus in Chattanooga, Anne Frank's diary in Dallas. We have to ensure that our Holocaust education is not being swept up in culture wars. And so we need to advocate and strongly encourage legislation to require it. We have 16 states that don't have anything on books regarding to Holocaust education. And we have to really relate it back to the health and well-being of all of us as a community, because it's not, when people can see that it's all of us. If we could have stopped it, if we could have stopped and done more in the Holocaust, maybe all the other genocides that have happened around and continue to happen around the world could have been and can be stopped. And so there is more that we can do. And our young people, they deserve to be educated properly and to be able to be critical thinkers. And if it's age appropriate, by all means, we should allow this material to be there.
And I think for me, this brings up, and thank you to Stacy and Emily for doing such a great job addressing this question. It brings up the need to support educators and to support educators in this work, which is one of my favorite things and one of the most fulfilling things about my job is helping them think through how to approach this in their classrooms in a way that helps combat denial and distortion, gives students a strong foundation to continue to learn about this history, and sets us up for success in that way.
I know we've gone a little long. It's been such a fantastic discussion. I want to give each of you a final 30, 45 seconds to share with us one thing you hope everyone listening tonight takes away, either from our conversation or from what we've seen so far from the documentary, that kind of a final takeaway message from each of you. I'll go Stacy, Marissa, Emily, in the opposite order of how we began.
Well, the final thought that I would like to give is that there's hope. As long as we're continuing to have the conversations, and as long as we're willing to listen to one another and to hear one another, there's hope. And so to not despair is so important. Having this conversation is great, and we really thank you for having us have this conversation today. Makes me hopeful.
I think for me, I hope that people walk away from this documentary and this discussion thinking about how to consider history in a nuanced and sensitive way, and to confront the trauma at the heart of a lot of the difficult histories that we wrestle with. And I also hope that people walk away from this conversation knowing that they're not alone in that. I think Holocaust education can sometimes feel very lonely. It can feel like a difficult battle that you're waging by yourself. And I just want folks to know that there are so many incredible support networks of cultural institutions and museums and other organizations and institutions in our community that want to offer you support as you do this work.
I'll kind of piggyback a little bit off of what Marissa just said. Be curious and do the research, but at a pace that is taking care of yourself. There is such an emphasis on self-care and creating a community of care for your classroom when teaching this history. And that is something that, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum emphasizes a lot in their work with students and teachers, is to make sure that you're taking care of yourself when you're learning about this, because it is not easy to hear and to read about and to see the imagery. But also let this documentary fuel your curiosity. And if you are viewing this screening tonight in the state of Maryland, take advantage of the proximity that we are to DC and go to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and learn from the artifacts that are physically housed there. Take advantage of that resource while it's there and able.
Well, thank you to all three of you. Stacy Aviva Flint from the Jewish Federations of North America, Marissa Schultz from the Jewish Museum of Maryland, Emily Goodman from the Baltimore Jewish Council. Thank you, all three of you, for such thoughtful discussion tonight. Thank you to Maryland Public Television for bringing us together to talk about this really important documentary that's coming this weekend. Sunday evening is the premiere of the first of the 3 parts. Make sure to mark your calendar, set your DVR. It's a lot of important conversation and thought will come from watching all 6 hours. And if you have questions, if you want to further learn about the Holocaust, learn about how to teach about the Holocaust, fight hate, fight anti-Semitism, feel free to contact any of our 3 organizations, because all of us are here to serve our communities and try and create a better world. So I'm Howard Libet with the Baltimore Jewish Council. Thank you all for joining us this evening. And please be sure to tune in for all 6 hours starting this Sunday. Thank you.